Hello, this is Lino Tadros from Falafel Software and welcome. This video is about showing you how to run web performance tests and load tests on Sitefinity web applications. So first of all, I'm going to actually bring up an application that I've written here during one of my classes. It's running on my local host and a port number using the built-in web server that comes with Sitefinity. It has some few pages here. It's not important, like the home page and about us page, a contact us page, and then I changed some of the themes. I'm using the solar page theme in here, and also I'm using a third-party theme here as well. That is not really the important part. The important part is that how do I actually test the performance of this application, for instance. So let's go ahead and go to Visual Studio here for a second. I'm going to create a brand new project. Let's go ahead and create this project in here. We'll call it SF Perf Test. For instance, we'll use a test project here from Microsoft. We'll say OK. And as you can see in here, it will create the Sitefinity performance test, and it will automatically include the unit test inside of it. That is not important for us right now, so I'm going to delete it from here. And I'm going to start by creating my first test. In this case, it's going to be a web performance test, as you can see here from the menu in Visual Studio. And it will start Internet Explorer. It has the plugin for the recorder already available for you. The only thing probably I will need to do at this point is to make sure I can take the URL for the main site. We'll Control C that, and I'm going to put it in here. Alrighty, let's go ahead and visit this site. Notice it recorded automatically while I navigated to, and every time I'm going to click on something like About Us, for instance, in here, go to the Contact Us page, go to my solar page, go to the new main page. All these things have been recorded. I can also go back to the home page. And let's go ahead and stop the recording at this point. Alrighty. Right now, Visual Studio is actually trying to detect all dynamic parameters, trying to find out if it can actually run the test as a web performance test. So we're going to run everything in here to show you that it actually did work correctly. As you can see at the bottom in here, this test have passed, so it's all good and dandy, and it's ready to go. The web test itself, as you can see, have all the steps in here. The navigation for the 5 or 6 different pages we went to on the left side of the screen. At the top in here, there is so many different things you can do. First of all, you can run this test at any time. You can debug the test so that you can put a breakpoint on any of these lines. You can also run the test by pausing before starting. That means you will have to push F10 to go from one line to the other. Or you can debug the test, which is also going to start all the way from the beginning and respect your breakpoints in the test as well. In a future video, we'll probably talk about data sources. Data sources, if you click on it, you'll be able to load outside data from SQL Server database or any ADO database available to you from a CSV file or from an XML file. So that if anything in here is hard-coded as a string or a value, you can always read it from an outside file, which is very handy as well. You can also set the credentials by passing a username and password if your website requires credentials, for instance. You can start recording from anywhere. So if I click on record right now, it will just continue from the end. It will continue a new recording session at the end. Sometimes you would like to insert something, right? Maybe the Contact Us page. You can right-click on that, and you can insert recording, so the recording will happen right after that line right away. So there is a lot of things, as you can see in here. You can insert a request, a web service request if you're using REST APIs or regular ASMX and so on. You can insert a transaction, a loop, condition, or a comment. All that stuff is available for you in here. The next part is adding a web test plugin or a request plugin. These are advanced topics that will be covered in future videos. That's in case you would like to implement in C# or in VB an extra plugin that has not been implemented, for instance, in the Visual Studio Web Performance Test. You can easily do that in C# and VB as well. For something, for instance, like pre-request and post-request, or something that you would run right before the test actually executes or right after the entire test executes and so on. You can do these things. You can actually generate code in VB or in C# based on everything you see in here. You can also parameterize the entire web server. A lot of people will be doing this on their local machine, as you can see, using a port number 62521, whatever the web server will allow them to use. But in the future, you might want to move this to a staging server or finally to a production server, and you do not want to redo the test. So you can parameterize the entire web server in here by clicking in there. You can say the web server 1, you can give it a name if you'd like, and you can point to a web server. I can change that. I can give it a name, we'll say local, and in here I have a web server, we'll say okay. I can add later on other ones in here so that I can allow this to happen actually based on a staging server or a production server. Alrighty. The next one is to promote dynamic parameters to web test parameters. Again, we will see this in a future video just to show you if there is a parameter in here, how you can actually move it to a dynamic parameter. Maybe you can even get it from the data source itself as well. Set request details. If I click on this line, it will show you every single request is being made. Notice here the name, for instance, the SF design class in here, that's my home page. So that's a kind of a weird looking request. In my report, when it gets back the results, if it will show me that it went to that localhost 6252, and that might not be the correct place after I move to staging or production. So it's a good thing to come in here and give it, we'll say for instance a name like SF design home page. So from now on, this is the name that will show up in all reports. So it makes it much easier to read. Also, while I was doing this, I was talking to you, so it took 5 seconds, for instance, the think time on that page, and then it took 2 seconds after the second one, and so on. So you can actually change this as like, you know what, during the recording I took 5 seconds, but I really want it to be just 2 seconds, and the final one I actually gonna do 2 seconds as well. You're more than welcome to do this as zeros so that you can do it as fast as possible on the machine. The response time goal here is extremely important. For instance, as management on the website, you will say, I do not ever want my home page to take more than 1 second to render on the screen. So if you set a goal here for the response time coming from the server back, you can say 1 second. It means if this page takes more than 1 second to render in my browser, I would like to make this as a failure. It will show up as a failure. For right now, we'll leave it empty, but we'll come back to it later on to show you how that stuff works. We'll say okay there. Alright, so that is my web test in here. I want you to notice the credentials for the password and the username. Stop on error is false right now. All these things are available on the entire test, which is called web test 1. If I go to every single one of these requests, for instance, there's a whole bunch of properties in here. For the cache control is currently set to false. The expected HTTP status codes. This is also very important because 200 is usually okay, 300 is about authentication, 400 was not found, 500 is an internal error, but maybe what you want to come in here and say 200 and also 300 are expected to be okay. So I don't want you to fail if anything other than 200 shows up. Maybe I want you to fail only if 400 and 500, so you can set the status codes that you expect to be a good code coming back. The expected response URL, again, I want to make sure that the response URL doesn't come from anywhere else other than the URL I'm putting in here. That's usually the URL that you're going to for that request. Follow redirects, again, if you want to make sure that nothing gets redirected using a 301 or a 302, you can do these things in here. Again, there is a lot of different things that you can think of, the think time, again, the timeout for the page in seconds, and so on. And also the method is a get. So if anything happens on the server, maybe R&D changes something on the server that makes this as a post, for instance, or a put, they're submitting something and you said it's a get. If that happens, you will get notified by an error saying something fundamentally changed in the way this page works. So again, this is an important thing to run this. Alrighty. Finally, in this, where it says create performance sessions for this is very handy, but I will have to use actually the entire Sitefinity project open in here, because if I click on it right now, it will tell you you must have a web project. So if I add the Sitefinity project that I'm testing in the solution itself, I'll be able to set some performance sessions in here to check on the SQL bottlenecks, the IIS bottlenecks, ASP.NET bottlenecks. I can actually monitor a lot more stuff using that inside of the system. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this one more time in here. I'll click on this guy. It will run, as you can see in here, it will do the every single one of them. Alrighty, and you can see total times it's taking some time to actually load the dependence. Is fine. But I want you to notice that the response byte here, so there is over 1 meg on the main home page. Okay, and we went back to the home back again, we loaded another 1 meg. So obviously caching is turned off. So yes, it is true. When I created this website, I just chose all the different defaults. So these numbers will give you a lot of information, will tell you that you are loading a lot of bytes in here for a web page, especially a home page that doesn't have much going on whatsoever. So you need to go back and actually turn off turn on the JavaScript, maybe caching and gzipping, and do a lot of more work so that maybe you get the hit on the first hit, but after that, all the jQuery and all the JavaScript and all the CSS is automatically loaded and cached so that you can get a much better performance. Notice here also that if I open up these plus signs in here, you can see all the sub requests that had to happen based on the home page. You'll notice here there is a web resource, the EXD from the Telerik DLLs. There is some more script resources have to be loaded. And finally, there is the falafel logo that you see here on the right side had to be made on a separate request to get the PNG. So I can also see how many bytes each and every one of those, the requested time, how long it took to actually get this for the request time, and the request bytes right there. And the total time was 1.131 seconds. Notice everything was successful in here, folks, right? So obviously here everything was successful, even though the first one took 1.1 seconds. So if I want to make a change to this, for instance, let's go back in here. I can go to this and I can say that response time goal will make it actually 1 second. So only on the first one, the SF design class. Alrighty. So let's save this and run this one more time. And if it takes more than 1 second, it will fail. And you can see this is a failure now because it took 1.066 seconds. So I was pretty close. Alrighty. So when you read the final data, you will notice in here when the result shows up, if I open up, for instance, the home page in here, you'll notice everything has been done correctly, but because the SF design home page, and notice the name here is using the reporting name that I created, okay? It's not using the old local host with the port number. It's a much better way to read that report. Alrighty, so if I open up, for instance, let's say the SF design class in here, I have the web browser. I can see what exactly been requested. I can see the request itself with the user agent and everything went out. I can also see the query parameters, the phone post parameters, if there were any. In my case in here, there weren't any. I can see the getter that went out. I can see the response that came back from the server. Okay, it's a 200 OK, and I can see the entire content of the response for the home page. The context in here, this can be very, very valuable as well. We will check that in a future video to show you how to use the agent ID, the test directory, and the test logs directory, how you can get all that stuff because they are available for you right away. Finally, the details in here. You can see the response URL has passed. If I click on the SF Design homepage, it will tell you that the response time failed because of a validation rule that I've set. The response time was 1006. Exceeded the response time goal of 1 second, and that's why it failed. Again, if I take off my response goal time, all the stuff would work just fine. Finally, I also wanted to show you that this is what we call a smoke test. So this test that I'm creating in here, let's go ahead and change the name for this guy. For instance, we'll call it SF smoke test. So when I click an SF smoke test like this, I can run my SF performance test every time, and we call it a smoke test because it's based on one user, of course. So once you're ready and you set your validation and you know exactly what's happening with your requests and one simple user actually doing exactly that same scenario, you can always go back in here and you say, I'd like to create, let's add a load test. So there is a difference between a performance test and a load test. For the load test, notice in here it will ask you with a nice wizard in here what exactly is going on. So I'm going to say next, we'll start, enter the name of the load test scenario, we'll call it, for instance, SF10 users, for instance. Okay, you can choose the think time, the profile for the think time, to use the recorded think times, use normal distribution centered on recorded think times, or do not use think times at all. I usually leave it here for right now. We'll say next. And you can actually start mimicking how many virtual users do you want to hit that web server at this time. Let's say, for instance, we want to do it with 10 users right now. You can also do step load. It means start with 5 and every 2 seconds add a couple of more till you reach 100 users. You can do the step load as well. Very easy to do using this wizard. So we'll say next. Now this is an important one. How should the test mix be modeled? Because you might actually have a lot of different tests that will be running. Do you want to actually base on the total number of tests or the virtual users, or based on user pace, or based on sequential test order? Each and every one of them is really going to show you different things about the test. For this one here, let's go ahead and base it, for instance, on the number of virtual users. We'll say next. Now we need to load the test that you'd like to run. So obviously I have only one here called the SF smoke test, but if I say add, it will show you all the tests in here. The nice thing about this, folks, is that this could be a regular unit test that you have written in your code. It does not have to be a performance test. So think about that for a second, that I can actually use a unit test that I can mimic maybe 100 people running this on unit test just to see how simply the code will perform as a bottleneck. Alrighty? So I'm going to move the SF smoke test here for my performance test. We'll say OK. Again, if I have multiple tests, I can actually set the distribution between them. Maybe I want a 50-50 between the two different functions, or if I have 5 functions, maybe give them 20% of the distribution each, and so on. Maybe one test is heavier than the other, so I can give them a lot more percentage than the other functions as well. You can do that. We'll say next. Finally, this is a great feature to be able to tell how you want the broadband or the bandwidth to actually take place. Do you want to actually use whatever your system will allow, like a LAN, a 3G, a cable, a DSL, CDMA, dial-up 56K modem, or pigeons, or whatever you think is the right way to do it. Alrighty, we'll say next. You can also have a much big choice here of browsers. You can use Internet Explorer 7, 8, 6, God forbid, or any of these browsers to mimic how exactly this is going to be testing. Let's go ahead and use it as if it was Internet Explorer 8, for instance, for right now. Remember, I can add more. For instance, I can add Internet Explorer 8 and Firefox and Chrome. I can set a distribution between them, because each and every one of them will use a different DLLs or different pipes to talk over the HTTP. So it might be a good idea to find out how your website will perform if people are hitting it mostly from Safari, for instance, or mostly from smartphones. You can definitely mimic that in here. Finally, the computer that you would like to run this on, and this is a huge thing actually in Visual Studio Testing in here. I can add a computer. We'll call it, for instance, my local machine in here, and now you have the ability to create counters. You can create performance counters for the application, for the ASP.NET, for the .NET application itself, for IIS, and for SQL, which is great. I can actually see all these monitors happening on all of them. The beautiful thing about this is I can run this test also on other machines. So if I have the IP address, for instance, for other machines, I can add them, and I can have multiple machines in the lab perform in the same test as well. Finally, here with the load test duration, how long you want to run this for instance, I'm going to make it 1 minute only so we don't have to wait too long, but usually we would like to see what the site will perform if we leave it running for an hour or two. So this is a good thing to run in your labs during the night to find out how the site will perform. Okay, we'll say finish in here, and there we go. We get the entire load test in here. You can always go back and change whatever you would like. As you can see here, the frequency, the test name. You can always come back in here and change whatever you would like. Okay, let me go and fix one thing on this guy so we don't get him to complain too much what it is. Yeah, there you go. I'll take this guy and this guy. Alrighty, there is my my test in here, and I'm going to change it again to 0 or empty in here so we do not have that error. Alrighty. And it's not, oh yes, it needs to be 0. Okay, there you go. We'll save that. And from our load test in here, I can run this load test. So let's go ahead and mimic 10 users doing exactly the same SF smoke test again. So we'll run this. And I just wanted to keep it here for a few seconds until you see the graph, which is a live graph. And after that, I'm going to stop the recording for a minute, and then I'll come back after the test is ready to go. But before I do that, I just want to wait for the graph to start. And there it is. You see the key indicators in here running on this machine. It will show you, for instance, the system under test, the controller and agents, the test response time, the transaction response time, and the page response time. These are all great things to be able to see already. And at the bottom in here, you can see everything that is going on for the About Us page, for the Contact Us page, and the performance happening for 10 users hitting the site at the same time. Okay, one of the things that I like the most, actually, the counters on the left side. There is tons of them. For instance, I can actually see it per page, per request, per scenario. I can see my SF10 users in here with the smoke test. I can see pages, the About Us page, the Get Us, Contact Us page, and Home page. Every single one of these counters, which there are tons of them in here, I can always drag. Let's say, for instance, I want to see the overall total pages. I can drag this guy and I can drop it on any of those. So if I drop it in here, automatically it will start drawing this. And as you can see, total pages have already shown up in this. Well, I talked too much the minute finished already. So as you can see here, I can actually create a lot of graphs, so I can live see what is actually going on the site. Finally, I'll end up with my load test summary, and I would be able to see everything I need to know with the maximum load of 10 people, how long it took. Also, one of the things that I like is that it will show you the slowest 5 pages on the site, top slowest 5 pages. So obviously the SF Design homepage here is the slowest one. It takes 1.75 seconds, which is eternity. Sometimes you want to do caching and all that stuff to make it much, much faster than that. Alrighty. Also, the top 5 slowest tests. Okay, we only had one test, but you can see if we had multiple tests, it will show you which one is the slowest one in the system. So there is a lot of things in here that you can definitely learn from the summary to know exactly what's happening based on the processor time, when the site was being hit heavily, how much of the CPU was being used, how much memory on the machine was being used, and you can go back and also fix all these things. So hopefully this was useful. It was a quick 20 minutes to show you how to do a load test on your Sitefinity website, and hopefully we'll show you more videos in the future to get deeper into more details on that. Thank you.